Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event titled Misunderstood and Underestimated, a conversation about advocacy and education in partnership with non-speaking students and their families. My name is Caroline Broussard, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the North Region SELPA Community Advisory Committee. We have a fantastic panel lined up this evening, but before I introduce them, I'd like to send a huge thank you to the many folks who helped make this meeting come to fruition this evening. First and foremost, Susie Clement and Anna Johnson for being incredible partners in making this event happen, and Katie Babcock for handling a lot of the behind the scenes work that folks don't get enough credit for. So thank you so much, Katie. So I will introduce our incredible panel this evening. Lucian Gonzalez is 16 years old and is passionate about advocating for non-speaking students. He's a poet and a 10th grade student working toward his high school diploma. This evening, he is joined by his parents, Susie Clement and Lenny Gonzalez, who are both professional photographers. Sorry, give me 1 second. I feel like the background noise on my end is a little bit loud. I'm going to see if I can get that quieted down. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. Yi Chen is a 10-year-old student who is educating the world about non-speaking autism with his blog, Yi's Voice. His words will be presented by his mother, Yanling Wang, who is a design director at Meta Inc. And I'm so sorry if I butchered her name. I apologize. Tara Vance is a Melungeon of Romani and Shawnee Native American heritage who grew up in a coal mining camp in West Virginia. She is autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, and apraxic. Vance was a secondary English teacher for 14 years and a dialectical behavioral therapy counselor for 2 years before founding Neuroclastic, an autistic-led nonprofit that provides resources to millions of parents, partners, providers, educators, and individuals every year. She has a bachelor's degree in language arts and literature and secondary education and a Master of Science in industrial and organizational psychology with a focus in diversity, inclusion, and poverty dynamics. Dr. Emily A. Nussbaum, her pronouns are she, hers, teaches courses in interdisciplinary disability studies, disability-centered curriculum, and accessible pedagogy at Mills College in Oakland, California, and teaches intro and advanced qualitative research at the University of San Diego. She is a lecturer in the Disability Studies minor at the University of California, Berkeley. She has worked for 25 years in all facets of education. She began her educational career as an instructional aide in 1995. She was an inclusion facilitator at San Francisco Unified School District and has worked in university-based teacher education for many years. Emily's recent academic efforts have focused on partnerships with multiply marginalized disabled community scholars, resulting in the publication of a children's book, academic articles, public events, and grant-funded projects. Her dissertation titled Vulnerable to Exclusion, a Disability Studies Perspective on Practices at an Inclusive School, won a 2010 American Education Research Association Outstanding Dissertation Award. Most recently, her co-edited book, Centering Diverse Body Minds in Critical Qualitative Inquiry, published by Routledge in 2021, won an American Educational Studies Association 2022 Book Award. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed journals and numerous edited volumes. Emily also spends part of her professional life as an advocate, consultant, and expert witness with families and legal teams in the pursuit of access to high-quality general education contexts and curriculum for students with extensive support needs and those most at risk for educational segregation and low expectations. So again, thank you to all of you for joining us this evening, but a special thank you to our panelists, for without you, this event wouldn't be possible. So I'm going to kick things off with Lenny Gonzalez, who's going to speak, who's going to present to kick us off tonight for our presentation. Thank you so much, Lenny.
Hello. Again, this is Lucian's father, Lenny Gonzalez, and he asked me to read his words. Starting off with, I'm Lucian Gonzalez. I'm 16 years old. I'm a non-speaking autistic who communicates by pointing to letters one at a time on a letterboard. So much of my life, people have misjudged me, believed me to be unintelligent, and treated me like a toddler because of how my actions are perceived. Not sure how to express the misery and frustration I felt for so long because it is not true, but my disability made it impossible to show my true self. I'm here tonight in hopes that people watching will learn that non-speakers in their lives are no different than me. I'm hoping you will take this knowledge and treat them differently. I'm here to change lives.
So I am Lucian's mom. I'm Susie, and I'm just going to back up and briefly describe how we got here. And while I do that, if anyone has any questions for Lucian that you would like to ask him directly, please put them in the chat, and that way he'll have time to spell his answers and have them ready by the time we hit the Q&A portion. So Lucian started in preschool with the school district at age 3. He had a number of developmental delays and was diagnosed with autism and intellectual disability and placed in a segregated mod severe preschool class. For years, he scored in the bottom 2 percentile of any assessment ever administered to him. He continued on the mod severe track all the way through elementary and into middle school, and year after year, his class did the same early academics like ABCs and days of the week. And while there were some exceptions, school staff generally treated and spoke to these students as though they were much younger, even as they reached their teen years. All of this time, Lucian had no speech and no other means of robust communication. We tried PECS unsuccessfully for years. We requested an evaluation for augmentative and alternative communication, but were told he didn't have the prerequisite skills required to qualify for one. With some pushing, we eventually did succeed in getting the evaluation. We got an iPad and tried various communication apps, but Lucian struggled to use them. We were told that it was because he couldn't read, he couldn't decipher the picture icons, and he didn't understand the basic concept of communication. Ultimately, he really only used the device to impulsively request his 2 most preferred items. He kept learning ABCs in school. Finally, around age 11, we discovered an educational method with a completely different approach. It presumed competence, in other words, that Lucian had the ability to learn, think, and understand, and approached his disability as primarily sensory and motor-based, not one of cognition. The method teaches age-appropriate material while using strategies to help the student overcome these sensory and motor challenges. Over time, students learn the skill of pointing to letters on a letterboard to demonstrate their understanding of academic lessons. We used this approach outside of school, and it was a slow build, but it worked. The problem wasn't that Lucian didn't understand things. It was that his severe apraxia creates a disconnect between his brain and his body simply doesn't do what his brain tells it to. With the right supports and a lot of hard work, Lucian mastered the body control needed to purposefully point to the letterboard. First, he answered questions about lessons by selecting from 2 choices, and then by spelling the answers. If he struggled, we didn't assume it was because he didn't know the answer he had just been taught, but rather that he needed help getting his body to perform correctly to demonstrate his knowledge. Eventually, he learned how to accurately spell to not only answer academic questions, but express his own original thoughts. He was able to openly communicate for the first time ever. He showed us that he is literate and quite smart. When he was reassessed using his preferred communication method, he scored well above his age level in both verbal ability and math. He also showed us that he is a complex, insightful human with a love of poetry, a dry sense of humor, and a strong sense of social justice. To demonstrate, I'd like to share a few quotes I've gathered over the years that I like to call Lucianisms. A big theme before we sorted out his schooling was his eagerness to learn, and he would often spell things like, "I am thirsty for education." And once, after doing some algebraic word problems, he spelled, "I like this kind of math. It's like how I get happy when I solve a mystery." He describes his challenges with body control. Once, he brought me a science book to do a lesson with him, but then he immediately ran away. When I asked why, he spelled, "My body was taunting me. I love science and I want to learn, but I toil in vain because my body won't obey my brain. Once we were discussing a movie where the main character behaves badly, but in the end redeems himself, and Lucian spelled, I nightly dream of my own redemption from my underperforming body. He's a teenager. Once while getting ready for school on a rainy day, he spelled, my bed is not doing its job, not sure why I'm not in it. And then there was the time that he spelled, stop telling people that I can spell because I feel embarrassed when you talk plainly about me. He sat back and watched me sputter and protest this for a while because I couldn't stand the idea of not being able to brag about him. Then he leaned in, tapped the board and spelled, I'm loving how far I can take this joke. My lunchtime is really boring, but now I can laugh at you. I'm really okay with you telling people. He craves connections. I'm so happy close friends are at my school. They are so inspiring. He is passionate about helping other non-speakers. This is something he expresses often. I really very much don't want kids relegated to baby classes. Stop making my friends do boring school. Not sure I can harp on this forever. Not sure I can act happy when my friends are stuck in baby classes. Not sure I can stand it. Not sure I'm not going to go crazy. I can't not think about it. And finally, in answer to an interview question, describe yourself, he responded, I am a free-thinking student of humanity. And to, what do you want people to know about you? He replied simply, I am an intelligent boy with many things to say. Please understand that Lucian is not a 1 in a million miracle among non-speakers. The only miraculous thing here is that we managed to find our way to the truth about his disability and support him properly, despite all of the misconceptions that steered us wrong for so many years. We fought so hard for what we thought he needed, but we were working with incorrect information. We now know that many of the approaches we used not only didn't help Lucian, they actively hurt him. Despite our best intentions, we caused our son trauma and harm, a lot of it. It's not easy to come to terms with this, but if we're unwilling to examine and accept our mistakes, we would continue to harm him. The bottom line is that once we know better, we must do better, even when it's deeply uncomfortable. I know it's not easy. Even after Lucian was able to demonstrate his abilities, he actually spelled, I'm so excited to show you my intelligence in front of his IEP team. It was incredibly difficult to get any meaningful changes in his academic program in the mod severe classroom. He ultimately moved to a different school that is over an hour's drive away, but it's worth it because they correctly understand and support his disability. He is now doing grade level classes, working toward a high school diploma, and is a valued and respected member of his school community. Lucian's experience, which is similar to that of so many other non-speakers, shows us that we need to presume competence in all non-speaking students, all of them, and allow them access to grade level curriculum and effective communication. Here is what Lucian has to say about his experience of school before he was presumed competent to think and learn, and after.
At my old school, I felt so helpless. Nobody realized that behind the chaotic movement of my body was an intelligent child who wanted so much to learn. It was okay when I was younger, but by the time I was in 4th grade or so, I couldn't tolerate the really boring schoolwork anymore. I got so angry and I couldn't contain it. School became a daily torture for me. I hurt myself and others when I couldn't handle the overwhelming sense of frustration and futility. My mom tried to change things, but nothing really changed. Too many people refused to open their minds, and it just crushed my spirit. Now I am haunted thinking about all my friends and fellow non-speakers who continue to be trapped like I was. When I started at my current school, it is really hard to express how miraculous the change was. I'd never been in a place where people understood that I was intelligent, treated me respectfully, and didn't talk down to me. Classwork is challenging and interesting. I cannot adequately describe the difference this makes in my life. I now have hope where before I only had rage and despair. I know I can have a fulfilling life. My plea is that people take my words to heart and help us change things for non-speakers. So much depends on people believing in us. Thank you.
That concludes our portion. We will now pass the mic to Yanling, who's going to share her family's experience.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me to share the story of Yi Chen. You will find the story very incredibly similar to the story of Lucian. I'll start by giving some introduction about Yi, and then I will spend most of the time reading the blogs by him. So Yi is a 10-year-old boy. He currently in 4th grade. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 2. Since he's 18 months old, he's been having all kinds of interventions, therapies, OT, PT, ST, ABA, and then seeing many experts. And still up to today, he has been having 10 to 20 hours therapies every week, ever since he was 2 years old, very busy little boy. And he's in school with full-time one-on-one aid. Due to very severe apraxia, he cannot talk, he cannot write, he cannot use sign language. Similarly to Lucian, he was taught to use PACS or picture-based AAC for many, many years, but still he could not really tell us what he truly wants, besides the very basic like water, bathroom needs, right? The most essential things. So there's no way for us to know what he's actually thinking beyond those basics. Even now, he still cannot nod to mean yes or shake his hand to say mean no because of his disability. But the good news is that we have a significant breakthrough since March last year. March 1st, 2022 was the year Yi said, that's the day I was reborn. With a new communication method that recognized that he's a disability, the true disability, he went from not being able to communicate, reliably with yes or no answers on being considered similarly with intellectual disability to now he has his own blog with more than 100 posts. Now I'd like to read a few because I think he described himself much better than I can. I'm going to start with May 2022. May 16, today I was able to stay dry in school for the first time in 2 months. I was upset that school didn't provide me with the right material for my education. So I intentionally pee in my pants to avoid doing the silly stuff. But I decided to end the behavior so that I can demonstrate my ability to enter general education. I feel incredibly proud of myself. May 21st. Today we went to an event at Bayland Park in Sunnyvale. I saw David, a student who graduated from UC Berkeley. He's a non-speaking autistic student. He was there with his parents. I was very excited because it gave me lots of hope. I can see my future in them. May 23rd. I'm at school name. I'm going to skip that. It is very stupid and very evil. I'm very upset about how they teach me. I don't want to go there. This is very stupid. They're still teaching me baby stuff. Mom, please take me out of there. I know you're fighting for me, but I don't want to go anymore. This is extremely difficult for me. Mom, please take me out of there. I can't do it anymore. May 24th. Today, I went to Open Mind School. It was the best thing that I've ever had in my life. I really like the students there. They're friendly and smart. The classes are wonderful. The math teacher is very smart. I think this will be a great school for me. I'm convinced it's a top school for me. Mom, please send me there to ease my pain at another school name, to help me learn and to help me make friends. I have suffered long enough. June 16, I'm 9 years old. I like sports. It makes me sad that I can't control my body. I usually watch other kids play. You have no idea how much I like to play. To people with autism, it's very difficult to play. You have no idea how much I desire to play with others. To people with autism, it is very difficult to watch others play without being able to participate. I pray that one day I can play with people. July 18. I used to have lots of tantrums. It is because I couldn't communicate. It was very frustrating. I couldn't talk. I couldn't use sign language. I couldn't use AAC. I felt trapped. I felt pain. I felt frustrated. I hate myself. I hate my family. I hate my friends. After I use RPM, I'm able to communicate. I'm able to talk using the letterboard. I'm free from the prison of silence. I'm free to express myself. Few people in the world understand what it is like to not have a voice. It is the most painful experience I have ever had. I'm happy that I can talk now. I want to help others. Everyone deserves to communicate. And then we sent him to a new school since August last year, and this is what he wrote. August 28th, 2022. I'm at OMS. It is an inclusion private school. I have been here for a week. I like it so far. It's the best school I have been to so far. It helps me make friends. It helps me to learn. It helps me to build confidence. I feel that I belong here. I'm confident that I can go to college. I'm hopeful that I can achieve a meaningful life. September 7. Today, I work on the 5th grade math. I did it right. That makes me feel so proud. I'm so happy. It has been such a wonderful year. I really like to learn. I'm hungry for knowledge. I can finally be who I am. It is incredible to look back. I was not learning anything at all. I was treated like a baby, but I no longer need to suffer. So now I want to fast forward to earlier this year, March 19. On Tuesday, Mom and Lang came to OMS for teacher-parent conference. I was very excited. It's the first time I joined a meeting about me. It's my first time creating a portfolio. I was really proud of myself. I was there to participate. It was really nice to see that people appreciate my ability in school. I was very happy. It's refreshing to have a school that believes in me. April 15. I was really, really upset when Grandma said that I could talk. I just didn't want to. I was so mad. I want to scream. I would trade anything to be able to talk. It's my biggest desire. I really want to talk. I want to cry. I want to pay a visit to Grandma. I want to show her that I have made so much progress. I want the whole world to know that I'm smart. I want to show them what I'm capable of. I especially want to show people in public school that I'm smart. I want to change the world. I want a world where everyone is treated with respect, including people with autism. I really want to make a difference. I know I can. I know I will. I know I'm capable. I know I'm strong. I want to go to college and get a degree. I want to make a difference in the world. I will. So yes, I believe in him. I know he will, and he will make a difference. I don't think that people ever intentionally want to make things hard for him or for the families with non-speakers. I think that's never the case. It's just in the past that non-speakers, they simply had no way to communicate to the outside world or for the outside world to understand who they truly are. So I'm hoping by sharing e-story here, we can help people to stay open-minded and understand what it is like for somebody to not have a voice ever, and how big a difference it could be if for them we provide accommodation so that they can have a voice, so that they can access meaningful education and have a meaningful life. Thank you.
Yanling, Susie, Lenny, Lucian, thank you so much for sharing your stories and for being vulnerable with us this evening. Just really appreciate your willingness to share so that we could all learn. I would like at this time to pass the mic to Tara Vance, who's going to present on Not All Behavior is Communication. Tara, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you all for having me. Can everybody see this? Okay,
Yep.
great. Okay. Oh, that's what I needed to do. Okay,
you
there we go. Cool. So I've asked Susie to remind me because of my time as we go through, so she is not being rude if she interrupts me, but I can't see the chat at the same time as full screen presenting, so I might need that. So I want to talk today about motor disinhibition. But I want to tell you a very quick story about myself. I was a teacher for 14 years, and that is not exactly an upward mobility kind of, profession that I tried very hard. I was probably trying harder than everyone else. And I had gotten myself into this position where I was developing like an entire school system's curricula and approach to anti-bullying. And that was a passion for me. And during this meeting that I had with representatives from our state and from our school board and some other really big, important people, I made bird sounds in the middle of the meeting. And I had no explanation for what I was doing. And I kept on putting my hands up under my arms. I was nervous. I had no idea I was nervous because I can't feel what's going on in my body. My body does not talk to my brain very well. And sometimes when people would start talking, I would just slam my hands down on the table really hard and scare everyone. And this kind of thing happened to me, not all the time, but at the worst times throughout my life. And I had no idea what was going on. This was motor disinhibition. I am dyslexic, I'm autistic, I have tic disorder, but I didn't get diagnosed with tic disorder until a few years ago, even though I've had this all my life. And I want to talk about how all of that is possible and what's going on neurologically. And we have a lot of research that's new just coming out on this topic, and a lot in the works that I have been privileged to be made aware of from research universities all around the world. So I got the inside scoop, and I want to share it with you. So you hear all the time that all behavior is communication, but that is a really harmful topic. And I want to tell you why, especially for non-speakers and who are severely apraxic, more than I am. I am able to speak to you. I'm able to type this independently. So I am apraxic, just like 87% of autistic people, but unlike autism, apraxia exists on a severity scale. So I would put mine as moderate, and I can't always speak. And I couldn't speak to you right now if my camera were on, because the distraction of that would just derail my thoughts too much. And I would be thinking too much about what my body was doing, and I would not be able to focus enough to make words happen. So tears is a good example of how not all behavior is communication that everyone can relate to. You could be communicating that you're sad and that you want support, or you could be sad but not want people to know, and your face is betraying you because you really want to hide your emotions and your vulnerability. You could just have a neurological condition that causes you to have random tears that are not in any way related to emotions, or you could have allergies or someone chopping onions, and that is not communication at all. It's a thing your body's doing. If you sneeze, that's not communication. It might indicate something to people, but it's not for other people. It's not an exchange of messages. So that's what we mean by not all behavior is for you. And when you have severely apraxic non-speakers, almost all apraxic people also have motor disinhibition, and they cannot control what their bodies are doing. There are 3 categories that we divide disinhibition into, and then we could break it down even more from here, but we'll keep it simple. Motor disinhibition is things that your body does. So your mouth with speech. So a lot of apraxic non-speakers actually never stop speaking, but what's coming out is not at all related to what they actually want to say. But some apraxic non-speakers don't use any words, and some have a few words, but not enough to convey, not enough spoken words, rather, to convey the complexity of their thoughts. Emotional disinhibition, we see as compulsive feelings, intense emotions that are disproportionate or completely unrelated to things that just happen. And cognitive disinhibition is being unable to filter or stop intrusive, irrelevant, inappropriate, nonsensical, or overwhelming thoughts, like with OCD. Everyone gets intrusive thoughts, but when you can't get those out of your head and they get stuck on a loop like a train on a track, that becomes a disinhibition thing where your brain cannot filter urges, including intrusive thoughts. And so people get stuck and think, is this my personality? I just thought about someone I love dying. Why am I doing that? Is that what I want? No, that couldn't be what I want. Am I a terrible person? And so people who have one kind of disinhibition often have all three types of disinhibition, but not always. When we look at things like obsessive compulsive disorder, apraxia, Tourette syndrome and tic disorders, and addiction even, these things all largely are coming from the same parts of the brain. And so we see a lot of overlap in these diagnoses and conditions. And they're extremely common for neurodivergent people like myself to have, a whole neuro cocktail constellation of diagnoses, because it's the same parts of the brain. I won't bore you with too much neuroscience, but that's mostly your motor cortex and your sensory cortices in your brain. Just signals are not stopping, or they are not getting to where they need to go. Somewhere there's an interruption. To make speech happen, 6 different cortices in the brain have to communicate with each other. And if there is low or disrupted connectivity with any one of those, then speech just might not be possible or might be unreliable. And so these are some conditions that are frequently associated with disinhibition, and it is possible to have multiple of these at once. Apraxia, autism, autoimmune encephalitis, PANS and PANDAS, which kind of same category of inflammation around the brain that can. So when you see someone with symptoms that come and go a lot, that might be more what you're looking at. Tourette's, tic disorder, coprolalia, which is like screaming inappropriate things, or copropraxia, doing inappropriate gestures that you totally don't want to do. It's like you think it would be so embarrassing if I scream in this conference right now. And then it gets stuck in your head. Oh my goodness, am I about to scream? Am I about to, please don't scream, please don't scream, or please don't pee on yourself. And then you do that thing because your brain gets stuck and your body is like a saboteur. ADHD, OCD.
Sarah, sorry, 10 minutes.
Thank you. Epilepsy, addiction, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injury. So these are some signs of maybe having motor disinhibition and trying to stop doing those things that you don't want to do. And this is how I did not realize that I had tic disorder. Permanent ridges on the inside of the cheeks from biting them. That's me. In fact, when I chew, I always bite my cheeks because I have deformed the insides of them. And I only have a few molars left because I have broken them from how much I grind my teeth trying to not do external things that people will notice more. Chewed up and mangled fingernails, missing or pulled out patches of hair, scabbed over lips, eating after painfully full, things like that. Touching things while you walk past them. You see a lot of autistic people do that. That's a motor disinhibition thing. So these compulsive behaviors are maybe communication and maybe complete and utter nonsense and completely unrelated to what the person wants to communicate with you. And we encourage people that autistic people need to stim, and that's that self-stimulating repetitive behavior, like rocking, flapping, and things like that. But it's extremely possible for non-speakers who have some repetitive behaviors that they actually don't want to be doing those things at all, that it's not a healthy regulating stim, but it's a thing that they're doing because their body is kind of sabotaging them. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more, because how can we value the consent of non-speakers and not violate their autonomy, but also support them if they have disinhibition? It's really hard to be able to know if non-speakers are doing things because of disinhibition or because that's actually something that they want to communicate. But we can't pretend that their external behavior is communicating the apex of their capacity to learn, so that we say, please go get me that cup over there, and they bring back the whole table with no cup on it, or they bring back a desk or something. That does not mean that they don't understand what a cup is. It means possibly that their body just is not complying with their brain. So these are some things that non-speakers that I personally work with and just love and respect young people have to say about their own body. Sabrina Guerra says, I lack the ability to make my body respond to my will. I often pay for that through others, believing I wish for things I don't, am ignorant of things I am not, and think or feel things far from the truth. Please ask me for the reason you seek. And Trevor is co-authoring a book with me right now. He is a teen non-speaker. He says, simply looking at me gives you exactly zero information about who I am. If you saw me at the store, you would see my stimmy hands and hear my scripts and think I am stupid. If you actually got to know me, you would realize I'm a snarky, smart teenager operating a body of a fool. My brain and body don't talk well to each other. It's like they run different operating systems. And when Trevor says this, I read this and I'm like, this is the most seen I have ever felt, because my body does not work with my brain. And I have never been able to communicate that because I didn't have the language for it. So I spend my entire life making sure that as many people have the language to talk about this, so that they don't suffer as much as I did. And as much as I suffered, Lucian and Trevor will suffer much more, because at least I can speak with my words and be believed.
Sarah, 5 minutes, sorry.
Thank you. So the idea that people can be mentally competent but struggle to control their body is completely normal when we talk about someone who gets injured or has a stroke, but it's not true when people think about autism. Apraxia does not discriminate, so neither should we when we assign the possibility of intelligence to humans. And then Wyatt, this is so important. He says, I keep speaking all done when I mean, love to get to work. I would really like to be doing piano lessons. I would really like to be doing lessons for school and helping with chores. But instead, I shout all done and get stressed over not being able to control my body. Make me get to work, I shout. Make me have a good life, but nobody listens. It's all in my head. Can you imagine that you keep saying all done or go home, but you want to stay and people are taking you home and shutting things down when you really want to keep going? Ashna is amazing. She met her principal and screamed hallelujah. And he says, I'm flattered, but she had no reason to be saying that. It just came out because apraxia, motor disinhibition. And William in this talks about how his mom has a hard time because she asks him a question. His mouth says one thing, but then he uses a letter board and spells the opposite. And she's having a hard time figuring out which one should she trust, the letter board or his spoken words. But he's saying, always trust what I spell on my letter board. So this is what we need to do. Anne Donnellan is just an amazing disability rights pioneer and scholar. And she came up with a framework called the least dangerous assumption. And this is when, because of motor planning and motor disability, you cannot tell from looking at someone what their capacity is. So the least dangerous assumption is to presume that they can hear you, that their body is not doing what their brain wants, and that they can be learning, and that they should be getting age-appropriate materials. And so that's what presuming competence means. And we don't do that enough for non-speakers. And they're all telling us the same thing. You know about Stephen Hawking, who had ALS, and he spent the last, 20, 30 years of his life completely unable to speak, toilet, walk. But then he had assistive technology to help him compose some of the most formative books on theoretical quantum physics ever. If you just saw him, though, you would not be able to look at him and tell what he was capable of without that technology and without the appropriate accommodations. And so we really have to try harder. And it's a human rights violation to not try harder to give our non-speaking students a free and appropriate education. And that includes the communication access that works for them, whatever it is.
Final minute, Tara.
That was my last slide, so.
Perfect. You have one.
Thank you.
You have 40 seconds.
Thank you so much, Tara. Really appreciate your incredibly informative presentation. I just want to mention, it's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat, but I apologize that I didn't mention it vocally, that there will be a Q&A session following our last presentation, which is coming up from Dr. Nussbaum, who will be speaking on advocacy support for non-speaking students. Thank you so much, Dr. Nussbaum, for being with us this evening and for presenting. Really appreciate you. I'm going to pass the mic to you now. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. You can just call me Emily. But it's such an honor to be here. When the first time when we met as a group of presenters, I've followed Tara's work and the Neuroclastic site. And so it kind of felt like me to meeting, like I was meeting a celebrity. And every time I get to hear from non-speaking folks and their families, it's also just such an honor for me. So thanks. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm happy to share my slides. Otherwise, if that is helpful, will you just remind me the amount of time I should keep myself to, because that'll help me. I can monitor it as I go through. Probably need a reminder as well. But
15 minutes.
15. Okay, terrific. Okay, let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay, and let me do presenter view. All right, can folks see that? Oh, hold on one second. My computer's really tired at this point in the semester. Can you see my first slide, or do you see my whole presentation?
We see your whole presentation. I think you want to hit use
Oh,
slideshow.
yeah, I always get that mixed up.
That's
God,
okay,
how
me
many,
too.
like years into using Zoom do I
There
get
you
that?
go.
Great. All right. So I'm just going to talk quickly. I feel like, Tara, your presentation left off at a perfect place for me. I'm going to start off talking about just presuming competence really briefly. I'm then going to complicate and talk about what I see as the fallacy of standardized assessment for lots of kids, but especially for non-speaking kids, and we'll focus on that. And then I'm just going to give a few advocacy tips to considering how to like really think about what advocacy in an IEP looks like, and with even just some ways to think about supporting kids at home, right, in the ways we live our lives as families and community, and a part of a lot of other spaces besides school. So I often ask this question of educators and special educators around presuming competence to try to imagine what it would feel like to have your competence called into question every day, and to be presumed incompetent until you could prove otherwise. And I know a lot of young people experience this, but this idea of being presumed incompetent until you can prove otherwise is actually sadly often really embedded into many of the practices in traditional special education, right? And we can see this in the ways that there are readiness models for access to something, that we limit, say, communication supports to PECs, and making this very limited set of requests of like taking a break, having something to eat, we limit communication to that until kids can prove that they should have access to anything beyond that. And so I think it's a really important thing to reflect on, even though I do believe those of us who don't experience this daily can't actually possibly fathom what the lived experience of being presumed to be incompetent until you prove otherwise is. And so 4 reasons to presume competence are: 1, expectations matter. We all know this. We think about this a lot for kids who are speaking and kids who are not labeled with disability. That IQ and standardized tests that claim to measure capacity are inherently flawed. I'm going to do just a quick overview of why this is. We know these tests are racist. These tests are also ableist. And I'll talk about, when I share that, my background as a qualitative researcher, and as someone who really looks to people that live with disabled body minds. And I use the concept of the body mind. I think it's really relevant to what Tara shared, in that our bodies and minds are interrelated, and that we experience disability or impairment like across these spaces, right? So standardized tests that claim to measure capacity according to a quantitative measure are flawed, right? So also, for those who don't communicate verbally and who don't have access to robust systems of augmented communication, we actually have no idea what they know, can do, how they learn, how they demonstrate knowledge. And I think, the stories from Lucien and Yi, as well as perhaps what was on some of Tara's slides, like make this so abundantly clear, right? How until we are really supporting students in access to robust systems of augmented communication, we cannot make any assumptions about what someone knows, what they can do, how they learn, and how they can show us what they know. That's the least dangerous assumption, part of that Tara referred to, right? So this allows us to make the least dangerous assumption, excuse me, about the students that we work with. And I just love this quote from Doug Bicklin. He was one of my mentors. He is the retired dean from the School of Education at Syracuse. And he simply stated it this way, that if you want to see competence, just look for it. And it really is that easy, except for when we are framed in traditional deficit-laden frameworks, right? And often these are the ones associated with special education practices, we don't see it, right? We are taught that you can only see competence through normative ways of being, right? Through neurotypical ways of existing in the world, responding to tests, etc. But it's like so powerful. I mean, I like feel so much just thinking of these words, right? If we want to see competence, just look for it. So I'm going to kind of skip over this next set of slides. If you ever want to go back and review, which isn't required, I put them in here because for me, these questions, if we turn to thinking of what I talk about as the fallacy of standard assessment for non-speaking students, it does come back to this question of epistemology. And epistemology is how we generate knowledge, right? As a university researcher, as part of my role as a university researcher, I think about epistemology a lot, right? What counts as knowledge? Who gets to be the experts in creating knowledge? I experiencing the privilege of quantitative research in this way. I am a qualitative scholar. The questions that I ask and the ways I look for answers is in very non-traditional qualitative research methods. So we can contrast positivism, right, which is sort of how we think of traditional special education approaches to research versus what I think of as constructivism, right, or these more holistic orientations in which we can position these relative to one another of objectivity, researchers being experts. This is where we see the use of standard assessment as being like generating higher knowledge, right? And, you know, somebody may go in and observe for an hour as a way to supplement sort of a full set of standard quantitative assessments they do, versus thinking of this idea that truth, right? Knowledge, it exists between people. It exists in our relationships and the way we exist with one another. And if we believe this, we would also believe that individuals with disabilities and their families are partners and experts. And for me, this is really important. This difference in epistemology, how we know what we know, how we make new knowledge is important because it informs theories of disability. And then it also informs our research methods. How do we study what we want to learn about, right? So we can see the use of scientific method, quantitative, experimental design. You often see this with kids with more extensive support needs in special education research that's called multiple baseline design, but it all relies on quantitative measurement of something that like can be observed and is deemed to be objective. The testing results, and I know parents know this, right? Like I deconstruct these reports all the time with families. The testing gets used to identify deficit as compared to a norm, and some idealized norm that is an ableist norm. It's a racist norm and it's a classist norm. And I'm very specific when I address those things. Versus the kind of orientation that I have in the world and how I understand people, how I understand seeking knowledge and how I do my research. which is constructivism, which might use a range of qualitative or sometimes quantitative methods through multiple disciplines. But the most important is that people with disabilities, oops, I left off a word, and their families are experts. And so again, why should you care about these things that I just threw out you, right? Is in this side-by-side comparison. And it's very important because it is positivism that undergirds standard assessments. And often like really the foundations of traditional special education practice. Versus constructivism, which assumes we all exist in this world together and that we all influence how we respond to one another, right? So there is really nothing more objective about that standard testing format and structure in my mind, right? That's a highly subjective experience as well. This constructivist or holistic approach, the way I think about, the way I try to teach teachers, embraces relationality. And again, families and individuals with disability are the most expert in their lives. This is who we have the most to learn from. And I talk to teachers about this a lot, and education professionals, like we might go to school to learn some things, but those things are in service of others. And they have to be in service of those who are the most vulnerable, as well as those people who are the most vulnerable and the most experts in their lives. And that essential to this way of engaging in the process is being able to see ourselves reflected in another person.
Sorry to interrupt, just 5-minute warning.
Sure. So I would also just say that standard testing for non-speaking students is not a reliable or valid source of knowledge. For a handful of reasons, the privileging of spoken communication to respond in standard assessments, and then the very limited ways that we often give non-speaking students access to augmented communication. And it's been talked about before by both Lucienne and Yi, as well as Tara talked about it, right? The very limited ability to communicate that might come from being given PECS icons, etc. And the assumption of able-bodiedness in the standard assessment process too, right? It assumes a certain way of being in one's body, mind, in the world, which then is required to respond in a certain way. So I'm going to skip over the early slides in this just to get to a few strategy-based slides. I'm happy to share this. I could talk for days about capacity building versus deficit finding. And a lot of my work in that area is based on a sort of, narrative analysis. So analyzing the narrative representations of kids in reports over years, in IEPs, and in meetings, right? So analyzing the way kids are represented and how it reflects either seeing them through this framework of capacity versus through this framework of deficit. And so the early slides are related to that. I'm happy to share like a full presentation on that. I have something that's been rejected by some special ed journals a few times related to that, but that has appeared in a parent advocacy newsletter. So, oh gosh, I didn't realize these had transitions in them. I apologize if this is not good visually for anybody. So I'm going to skip over a few slides. And so when I talk about a capacity building framework, it is not just talking about student strengths or saying nice things about a student. It is a way to understand an individual fully, right? Including the things they may do that challenge us the most from this place of capacity. And so for me, why to use it is that it repositions students. It takes them out of the problem position, and it removes problems from them and shifts them to educational professionals. And it leads to more meaningful and student-focused educational decision-making and learning opportunities. And for me, I also think like it just feels better, right? Like it's how we all want to be viewed, even when we're at our worst, right? We might want to see that as evidence of our capacity and need for support in the world versus as evidence of our deficit. So I have just a few examples. I'm going to skip these. You can go back and look at them. And I have a lot more extensive work in this area. But I just wanted to end in my last couple minutes with what this can look like within the IEP documents. So capacity building within the IEP, one, presuming competence, right? Give access to high quality academics written into goals. And I often encourage families and IEP teams to, of course, the other parts of the IEP are very important, but the goals are really the teeth of an IEP, right? And so any kinds of accommodations, supports, and tools we list for students elsewhere, we need to bring those into goals. We need to give access to academics, writing that into goals. We should think about communication supports as more than PECs. We should use plain language to describe communication access for students, and that we should recognize individual students' body minds. And it's why, for me, I like to even think beyond what this notion of quote behavior is, right? Because for me, it's actually a really limited and limiting construct, right? Versus how do we think of recognition of an individual student and their body mind and what that brings in to the educational space. And capacity building within your own child's life, thinking across the language that we use, making sure it's age appropriate language, words, our vocabulary and our tone. And remembering that as families and friends, we're models of age appropriateness to friends and community members, and to use language in ways that demonstrate competence. We can also think about the ways we provide support to our kids by first remembering that we all rely on support from others, all of us, and that our lives are interdependent. I think about that actually in relation to the IEP goals, where I see teams wanting to strip out accommodations and tools from IEP goals and this focus on independence. And every time I was talking to Susie earlier today, I was like, God, how many of us rely on calendar notifications to actually function anymore? And I was like, my professional life would completely fall apart without calendar notifications that were set to my time zone. I couldn't function. So why can't we do the same thing for non-speaking kids in the context of their school lives and out of school lives? Support should always promote dignity and autonomy, right? And again, we don't want to conflate autonomy with independence. Support provided with dignity can facilitate autonomy, and support should enable someone to have choices, and real choices, not the choice of I want a break or I want a snack. It should give someone control over their life, and again, meaningful control. And it should allow them to participate and contribute in ways that are important to them, not in the ways that we dictate, but in the ways that are important to them. And finally, I'll just end with thinking about how do we give access to our kids? How do we give them access to things from a capacity building framework? Just thinking about information, conversations, et cetera, that we would give to a speaking child of the same age. In educational settings, too often I see kids at middle school and high school reviewing the day of the week, the calendar, the weather. These are kids that have been doing that every single day of their lives since they were 5 years old. And we should assume competence and make the least dangerous assumption about them. So how do we do this at home, right? How do we watch the news or listen to NPR, if you listen to NPR, and talk about those things with our kids? How do we also think about giving access to things that can build and broaden interests and build knowledge at home that kids don't get at school, right? So using all kinds of technological access, whether it's documentaries, age appropriate novels in the form of audiobooks, experiences in the community that other kids might be getting through field trips, etc. So yeah, those are just some general tips, and these are all really based on the kinds of things that should be happening at school and that I encourage with school teams, but we can also think about ways to build on and augment these at home. Okay, so thank you so much. I'll stop my share. Yeah, I hope I didn't overextend my time.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate your really informative presentation. At long last, we're at the Q&A section of our meeting. Thank you all so much for hanging in there with us. I'd like to hold space for questions that were directed to Lucian and Yi. I give the floor to you if you want to answer those live or in the chat, totally up to you, no pressure at all, but definitely wanted to make sure that we prioritized those questions first.
Yeah, Lucian did answer. I saw, I think, 3 questions that came through, and he answered them. One was the name of his current school, which is Open Mind School. And are there other non-speakers there? He answered, yes, some, but not all. There was a question about what subject at school feels easiest with having to spell your work out. And he said ELA. And then he said that math is the hardest. And I do his math homework with him, so I can attest that that is true. And then someone asked a question about whether his spelling was always accurate, what he wanted to say. And he said that his spelling is always accurate.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susie.
Sure.
Yang, were there any questions for you or for Yi that you'd like to address?
I don't think this question is just for Yi, but I do see a question about probably for both Lucian and Yi about what will it take? What can parents do to get schools on board with meeting these students' education needs? Unfortunately, there's no easy answer. Lucian, Susie, if you have some, please speak up. One thing is that I think the understanding awareness about how non-speakers truly are and how to better support them is still something very new. So many schools still struggle to understand what it means and how to support them. We actually just had a conference on Saturday for the non-speakers, and we'll have about over 143 people registered for the event. Out of the entire audience, I think I'm personally only aware of maybe less than 5 families who were able to get public school to truly meaningfully support them to communicate, which is really hard. So we still have a lot of work to do to make it really work for our students. But Susie, yeah, if you know more than I do, you have been on this journey longer than me, so please.
I think if I knew more than you, Yanling, we wouldn't have a need for this session.
Thank you so much, Susie and Yangling. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, either for any of our panelists, please feel free to raise your hand. While folks are getting questions ready, if that is the case, I'll take one that I see in the chat. And it's quite a long one. It says the phenomenon of non-speakers having huge communication breakthroughs with letter boards is joyfully becoming more and more frequent as word gets out among families. Sometimes this is a several years long process before a student becomes fluid on the board with several partners. What will it take? What can a parent do? Oh, is this the one that you just read, Yangling? I'm so sorry. You cut to the chase, which was awesome. Thank you. And I hope you all see the love in the chat for your students who are so gracious in spending their time with us this evening and sharing their thoughts and words. Lots of love for them in the chat. Again, this time is for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hands.
There's a question in the chat. Caroline, you want me to read it?
Sure.
This is from Andrea. It says, thank you so much, Lucian and Yi. Oh, it's moving now. Okay. Yi Chen and your parents for sharing. I was wondering if you would or do use a regular keyboard for writing and typing or a large format keyboard, or why do you prefer the supported letterboard versus a keyboard?
I think for actually many of students that because of praxia, because how fine motor skills is still a goal that we'll work on since he was 18 months old, we've been having OT and intensive OT multiple hours a week, but still that's an area because his name is fairly simple, right? E with probably the most simple name to write, but he still cannot hold a pen to write that. So that's the amount of disability he has. And the reason why letterboard is easier compared to a keyboard iPad is that it's just larger on a space. Number one, it's larger, has more space, so it's less likely to hit on the wrong thing. He still will hit on the wrong thing. But at the same time, we are practicing typing. Now he's practicing typing on iPad, and our goal at this point is typing 5 words per day. Versus on a letterboard, he can write a whole journal, do his reading comprehension homework, do his math homework using letterboard a lot faster. So that's where we are now, but every student is on the different path, and some might get to the iPad or keyboard faster than others. Susie, anything else you want to add?
Well, I can't ask Lucian because he did such a great job of sitting with us for so long, but it was time for him to go for a walk. So he stepped out, but he has been asked this before, so I feel like I can speak to it a little bit. For him, the tactile experience is really important. And so we sometimes use a laminated letterboard like this, but if we use this, this one doesn't have it, but we'll often put a little rolled piece of tape on each of the letters. So he has like more of a target and that tactile feeling of, when he hits the target. We also use the plastic stencil that where he's actually touching or putting a pencil through the hole that is the letter. He can use a keyboard as well, but it's like getting the amount of pressure right to push the button the right amount to get it to register and not just kind of brush against it is something that that we need to keep working on. He's also tried doing things on an iPad. People ask a lot why he can't, if he can point at a letterboard, why can't he just point at an iPad? For one thing, the iPad is very overstimulating in a lot of ways to him. So it creates more sensory input that he has to try to filter through and resist all of the OCDs to swipe and things like that. But the other thing is because it's just completely flat and he can just really easily brush against something and have it, register when he didn't mean for it to register. It's just not a practical option for him right now.
Yeah, that is something that a lot of non-speakers have a really hard time with high-tech AAC because, for one, especially the picture-based anything, eye tracking and visual tracking is a motor skill. So getting your eyes to focus and also being able to control your focus is, even for adults now, we find ourselves just mindlessly scrolling through things. We go to check email and we're just like, imagine if you had severe disinhibition, how much more so that could be distracting. And so with the picture base, there are so many people who once they get access to reliable communication through spelling, they will say that they spell that they would want juice but touch milk. And then, or they would try to type something and throw the iPad and break it and then get in trouble. And so they would have trauma association with the technology because they couldn't control their bodies. But the main thing is these low-tech letterboards are boring, right? They are visually boring. They're non-distracting. With the laminate board, you can roll it up so there's just one line at a time to help with the eye tracking. I graduated valedictorian, but I could not read until I was in 5th grade. I went from being by far the lowest performing student in my classes because my eyes could not track, but no one in the 80s understood that. And so there are a lot of reasons that people start out on a letterboard, but it's becoming a lot more frequent now that these methods are more honed and practiced wider, that there are a lot more people who are transitioning to keyboards.
Thank you so much, Tara. I want to answer a question from Jacqueline. Yes, the recording of this presentation will be posted to the North Region SELPA Community Advisory Committee website, probably in a couple of weeks. So if you go to, I think it's www.northregionselpacac.org, click on the tab that says Community Advisory Committee, and then the videos are typically on the left. Most recent should be on top, but we'll get that out to everyone via link as soon as it's ready to be posted. Let's see. Want to make sure I get any of the questions in the chat. Again, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask it live, or you can drop it in the chat.
I see one from Brian. I am curious about what the process looks like to communicate live with Lucian or Evie willing to demonstrate how this interaction works for something like what they would like to have for breakfast. Well, Lucian has stepped away, as I said, so he can't do that. But we do have a Caroline, if you want to put in the link to the Google Doc with some resources for people, for non-speakers. One of the links in there is a link to a video that we made about Lucian that actually pretty much shows his entire process of how, from his very first session of just pointing at choices written on paper to getting to the point of spelling and also handwriting. So if you take a look at that document, you'll be able to see much more than just what he wants to have for breakfast.
There's a question in the chat. When we spoke with our child's speech administrator, she mentioned that letterboards are, quote, facilitated communication, which is not supported by the National Speech Association. Thoughts?
How honest can I be?
Honest, but
Okay,
but
so
rated, G or PG.
of course, I have personally been in the trenches for years. I run the largest autistic-led nonprofit in the world, and like I was mentioned in legislative proceedings today and late last week in 3 different countries over this issue. The reason is simply because autism is a $3 trillion global industry, and there are so many there's so many power players who are their work is going to just totally be usurped. And behaviorism, when someone's body doesn't work and you can't judge tics and motor disinhibition as intentional behavior, then instead of behavioral supports, we start needing more like physical therapy and motor coaching. And so it's a political thing only. It is not facilitated communication to point to a letterboard, because there is no one touching the arm of the person. But there is a growing, but not a currently very large body of research on these methods, because there is such an aggressive push against them, and it is not scientifically based. I'm here to tell you that I'm working with research universities around the world, and it is just, it's all politics. And I'm so sorry that you experience that. A lot of people experience that.
Could I ask you a follow-up question to this? Then, are there research studies or, peer-reviewed journal studies in the pipeline regarding this?
Yes, and there are already some that show agency, which, to me is absurd. No one right now is questioning if I am the author of the words that are coming out of my mouth. So it is just violent to even demand that non-speakers have to prove that they are the author of their words. And we've been using letterboards for people who have strokes for decades. Because we presume their competence. We know that they're one of the first things that it tends to go, depending on where a stroke is, or other brain injury, is often motor and speech. Because, like I said, 6 different parts of the brain have to coordinate to make that happen. And so we've been using letterboards for other populations, but there is no major global industry regulating and controlling and making fortunes off of those. So it is not political until it becomes autism. And so, yes, my existence as an autistic person is political, and that is, extremely frustrating, but that is our reality. And yeah, I wish that things were different, and I work very hard to make them different.
Tara, I'll just add the example, comparing the example of a stroke victim or someone like Stephen Hawking. The difference is that they were fortunate enough to have a period in their lives where they didn't have that impairment. So people don't question that they still have the cognitive ability. Our students that we're talking about never had the luxury of, ever having that. So that's the difference. And we have there's just such a bias against believing that that they could have intelligence when their body looks the way it does on the outside, and they do the things that they do from the outside.
Thank you, Susie. Emily, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for me, this ties back to this question of like what counts as knowledge production, right? And it is the privileging of certain forms of knowledge making, particularly as it relates to special education and students labeled with disability. And this happens in university-based teacher preparation in all of the major journals that only privilege certain kinds of articles, right? We talked about, are there peer-reviewed journal articles? Well, the most powerful special education journals will not publish certain kinds of articles. And then it trickles down into the lives of kids in schools, right? We see that happening all of the time in terms of the ways that it trickles down. And so, yeah, and the politics of that. And it's why, too, thinking what Tara was offering, I'm happy to share it. I can't pull it up quickly enough to be able to put it in the chat before we're through, but I'm happy to share an article that came out recently from some dear colleague friends on the East Coast in a peer-reviewed journal called it's about the autism industrial complex, which is what they call it. And it has to do with some of these really mainstream practices that have become the political nature of autism, autistic people, and who gets labeled with autism. And then the like for-profit orientation to a lot of some of the most accepted practices, and thus what school districts, et cetera, accept. So it's a great article. I'm happy to share that, to pass it along if people want to. Very few, Mark. And it's so nice to see you on here, Mark. I only think I know you through social media. But anyway, yeah, Mark said how many autistic people are employed in this megabucks autism industry. So I'm happy to share that as well.
I'll also add again in the document that Caroline put in the chat, one of the organizations listed is called United for Communication Choice. And if you go to their website, they have a compilation of the research that does exist.
I have some very extensive reference lists. I'm trying to, if the host can let me in on my other device, I will post the links to my sources, and I have one on motor disinhibition and, apraxia and all the things that I've started putting summaries up of the research just to make it easier to go through, but I will put those links in the chat.
Thank you so much, Tara. Katie, if you could let Tara in on her second device, that'd be really helpful. Anna Johnson, I see your hand up. Do you have a question?
I don't, but there were two other questions in the chat that were further up, and I wanted to let folks know I see you, and I want to say them. So the first one was Rachel, great talks. What is the plan to fix schools? And then the other one was, I'm wondering again for Susie and Yang Ling and Tara Vance, how did you learn to read and spell right if it was never taught in the SDCs? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the reading one. I wish I knew the answer to the fix the schools question, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, Lucian's he's a smart fellow, so he did get exposed to the alphabet a lot. We read to him. He exists in the world, is always taking in information. And I mean, there are plenty of examples of students who learn to read before they start kindergarten. And I've never explicitly asked Lucian how he learned to read, but I'm just kind of going on the assumption that, it's from all of those things and the fact that his brain is really good at pattern recognition, and he actually can read like so fast. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can answer that too. So I think one thing I did right before we discovered this communication method was that I kept reading to E, even though he couldn't sit down quiet with me. I remember maybe 5 years ago, I was talking to our BCBA who provide ABA with E, said, my goal was that E can sit down with me for 2 minutes and read the books together, because it seemed like an impossible goal back then. But the good news is that I kept reading half an hour to him, even though he might be just jumping around, knocking on walls, whatever he was doing, his body was doing these random things. But then we read to him day after day. And I think that paid off because the exposure of reading the different books and different materials, he takes all those in. In addition was that during the weekend, our family have a family routine about hiking every weekend. And during those hiking trips, my husband and his brother, 12-year-old, they sometimes talk about the math problem they're learning. So then that's like, oh, that's where you, and then he told us, that's how I learned the 5th grade math, or even 6th grade, even though I'm only 4th grade. So it's like, okay. Yeah, he told us he paid attention. Whatever we're talking about, he paid attention and he learned. Just want to show one more example was that in our house, we speak 3 different languages, but we're always in the past just talk to E in English because we thought one language is already hard enough. We don't want him to learn another language. Why we have another son learning Mandarin and Cantonese. But then it turns out after now we have the letterboard, turns out he actually understand completely all the Mandarin or Cantonese we're talking about. So again, he's just paying attention and he learned no matter what.
I'll also add something I heard another non-speaker say in a presentation when he was asked this question. This was actually David Tuplitz, who recently graduated from UC Berkeley. And his answer was, from stupid PEX cards. So they do have the pictures and the words, and they are, these kids have to endure looking at them for many hours for many, many years. And he was being snarky. He actually was, I talked to his mom just at this Saturday's conference. She said, we did, teach him how to read actually. But he was just making the point that, it's not like they're not exposed to language. It's not like they're not exposed to words. So.
My daughter is very apraxic. She's 6. She's also autistic and ADHD. but she was reading before she could speak. And she is hyperlexic, and that is pretty common among non-speakers and apraxic people, and also that is supported in research. But yeah, so a lot of autistic people can read very early. I just there is a new book about neurodivergent reading called Reader's Block. That's amazing. I got featured in that one too. But yeah, a lot of us pick up reading, and we read very differently often, and have different takeaways and things. I was a reading teacher for 14 years after not being able to read half of my school years. And it was actually large print that did it for me. That's all I needed, very large print. And so I found a book that had very large print because I was trying to make it easier on myself to do a book report. So I found the one with the fewest words per page. And I could read. I was getting very high test scores, even though I couldn't do any of my in-class assignments. And it was because our test books in the 80s only had 2 questions per page. And they had enormous text, like 1824 font, I don't know, but and we just had to circle, one of the A, B, C, or D answers instead of filling out the little bubbles, because I got lost on the Scantron bubble sheets too, because that's visual tracking. So yeah, large text audiobooks. We call it calling in backup too, with using audiobooks, because that takes a lot of the backup is a more dominant sensory system. So the processing burden becomes auditory, and the eyes only have to follow, but eventually the eyes become good at following, and the audiobook is too slow and they want to get rid of it. And that might be a fast process for some people and a very slow one for others, but always pair the audio with the large print text. Those are my 2 big recommendations to people.
Thank you so much, Tara. We're running a little bit over time, so I'm going to take one last question, which I see in the chat. It comes from Andrea, who says, amazing. Currently, how do Yi and Lucian prefer their reading materials? Regular print, audiobook, large print? I can relate to so much of what you've said. For example, my child has a hard time tracking text, especially when the print is small.
Currently, Yi prefer the books to read to him because looking at a book is very, very tiring for him. He learns a lot faster by listening, but the book is always present. So when we're reading, he will look at the book. It's just he cannot read out the book for a really long time. So far, we've been just using regular print, and it seems like that's working okay for him. But it is tiring for him. Yeah.
I think it's pretty much the same for Lucian. I'll ask him what he prefers, and he often would like me to read him something. I know he's read it himself already, but he likes me to read it. And I think part of it is the visual fatigue. I think part of it is the connection. And I will also say that there is an aspect to this educational method that actually helps teach the eye tracking. So it's about much more than pointing to letters on a letterboard. And we actually have done some work that's specifically geared towards helping him be able to control his eyes well enough to, go from left to right, word to word across the page. The way he actually reads is photographically. So he just like looks at the whole page, and he has read the whole thing. He doesn't actually read it this way naturally. So we have to actually teach that as a skill, because he struggles with the control over his eyes, and he also gets the very easily the sensory fatigue with his vision.
Thank you, Yanling and Susie. Really appreciate you sharing that. I think I missed a couple of things in the chat. I apologize, Mark. I think you had written earlier, could a letter board be designed as a Bluetooth device so that when he hits the letter, it is transmitted to a computer? And Susie Guerra remarked, that's a cool idea. And I think there was later in the chat, making it more lightweight might make it more practical. Rachel replied, there are Bluetooth keyboards people use, but they're heavy compared to a letter board, which is hard for the CRP to do for any length of time, and they are finicky. So it could be a matter of just simply engineering a lighter one. And then Mark also writes, I also wondered if track balls, which work like a mouse, except that you spin a ball to control the cursor, might work well for those with apraxia. Okay. I want to raise up Dr. Marina Vasserman's comment. Lucian and Yi, owning your story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as navigating your experiences on your own. Embracing vulnerabilities is risky, but so important. Keep sharing your story and being your authentic selves. You have a huge team of supporters cheering you on every step of the way. Thank you for bringing us together tonight. Well, I can't think of a better way to close this session. Thank you so much for that comment, Dr. Vasserman. I want to raise up briefly that this what I hope will be the first of an ongoing conversation dedicated to the advocacy of non-speaking students. This presentation this evening is brought to you by the North Region SELPA Community Advisory Committee. I dropped a flyer earlier in the chat about the Community Advisory Committee, and the webpage is, I just dropped in the chat. We're always looking for additional members to join the committee to help put on really interesting events such as these for education and advocacy. I also want to tee up Sherry Washburn. Our next Community Advisory Committee is on May 22nd at 6 p.m. The business meeting will run about 30 minutes, and then there's going to be a presentation to follow. Sherry, would you like to talk about that presentation?
Sure. It'll be an hour and a half, similar format to this, a few panelists, and we're going to be discussing post-secondary transition planning. The overall question we'll be trying to answer is your student's post-secondary transition plan adequate? And we'll have post-secondary transition experts and leaders in the provision of services on our panel: Department of Rehab, Evo Libri, someone from the Pediatric Epilepsy Fund. That's not the name of it, but it's close to that. It's a great panel, and even if your student is not of post-secondary transition age yet, they will be. And it's never too soon to start thinking about planning for what's after K-12 education. So I hope you'll join us.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm sorry I put you on the spot, and I think your hand was raised, and that's probably not why.
No, that was why I was going to ask you to plug it, and you did, and put me on the spot. That's fine. Awesome.
Again, huge thank you to our incredible panelists this evening, Susie, Yanling, Tara, Emily. Thank you so much. We wouldn't have had an event tonight without you. And I also want to send a huge thank you to Katie and Anna Johnson, who helped put this together, and for all of you for participating this evening. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Katie, did you have anything you wanted to share, or no? Okay, that's okay.
Nope.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you being here this evening. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.